Hello, CenCal Dreamin. It's great to be here today. Thank you for coming to our session. We so appreciate you being here. We hope you enjoy the tunes. We certainly did, and hope you're all stocked up after lunch. Thank you for doing that poll. Looks like people mostly were leaning towards building on their last project, which is super interesting. Callum, it looks like you have a bit of persuading, bit of work here to do today, possibly.
Yeah, it seems like we've got some convincing to do.
Yeah, so this session is called Build versus Buy. Working with software, it's one of the biggest and most common questions that you've already come across, I'm sure, and that you will come across. Should you develop your own custom solution from scratch? Should you build something? Or should you buy something off the shelf from a third party? So I've already had some conversations already on LinkedIn around that. I don't know if anyone is here today, but thank you for helping inform this discussion today, in which we're going to try and raise awareness of considerations and examples on both sides of build versus buy from people who have experience helping customers make this decision in real life. So it's my pleasure to be virtually sitting alongside two panelists here today. So I wonder if both of you could tell us who you are and why you're representing build, why you're representing buy in our discussion today. Joe, do you want to go first?
Sure thing. So my name is Joe Wheelock. I'm a Salesforce project manager and a lead admin at Bitwise Industries. I work entirely on Bitwise's internal Salesforce instance. And I've been working on this team for about 3 years, during which I've been building out the org the whole time. I'm representing build because Bitwise has a whole lot of different stuff going on, a lot of really custom processes. And so housing all these wildly different processes and data needs in one place requires a lot of custom work.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. What about you, Callum?
Yeah, so I'm Callum Horry. I'm the Director of Product Engineering at Provenworks. We're a Salesforce ISV partner and the developers behind Address Tools, Simple Import, Phone Tools, and Industry Complete. I've personally been part of the Provenworks team for just over 8 years. And as a result of that, I've worked on a number of projects, lots of where people have just purchased our solutions and I've helped them implement. But, over the time of 8 years, that's lots of time in the space. And as a result of that, I have also sometimes recommended to building their own solutions as well sometimes. So This should be an interesting talk. I might be sitting on the fence a little bit, but hopefully I've got lots of experience of actually helping people choose the buy option.
Lovely. And I'm loving the fire emojis. Keep it up. There's lots of Team Joe here right now. So let's get into it with our first discussion point. Who is building and who is buying? Recent conversations that I've had, including one with the GSI, I found it was quite interesting that they were saying that the public sector is often more inclined to build rather than buy, that there's often this narrative that our needs and our org possibly are so nuanced and complex that no out-of-the-box solution will be able to kind of understand and fit with what we need. So I was wondering, maybe Joe, do you want to go first? Do you find that there is a specific type of client that you've come across in your experience, whether it's industry or size, that typically wants to build?
Sure. So yeah, my stakeholders are usually internal and limited to the private sector, so I can't weigh in too much on the public versus private side. But I absolutely do get that sentiment of our workflow is super complex. We just need to build custom. The company I work for, Bitwise, does custom software development. We have a lot of developers and tech-oriented folks. So I think developers and people who work with developers do tend to think we should just build this ourselves. We can do this. And often that is exactly what my team and I end up doing. Sometimes that is the right way to go. It works great. But I do generally try to avoid settling on even looking at whether build or buy is the right option right at the beginning until you've done a pretty thorough discovery into your stakeholders' needs.
Awesome. Thank you. Callum, you got something to weigh in here on who is building, who is buying?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think my stance is kind of across a lot of years of kind of seeing what's changing. In recent years, I'm seeing much more desire for organizations to adopt an off-the-shelf solution. Organizations newer to the Salesforce platform are often sold on this low-code, no-code benefit. And as a result of favoring approaches where they can just click a button, bam, everything's ready, and off they go. And that's what a lot of products can actually offer. The one type of organization that I do personally find is always more reluctant to opt for a pre-built solution. It's always enterprises who are handling large data volumes. Quite often we find that they will have fleshed out technical teams internally. So kind of what Joe just said, these companies already have a technical team internally. They have their hands ready to get involved. So quite a lot of time they'll already have internal processes to consider how to build these solutions out much quicker than maybe some of the smaller and newer businesses are to the platform.
Super interesting. So we're already getting some kind of variables to consider there, like a developer mentality that Joe mentioned, and maybe business size and sort of appetite there as well. I know we'll come back to that later. So we've called this session Build versus Buy, which feels pretty combative. Is it black and white, do you think? I wonder, let's kind of talk real examples for a second. Callum, maybe, do you have any stories of clients in your time who you think have made the wrong or the right decision when it comes to build versus buy?
I never want to brand people right or wrong, but when they buy the solution, they're right. No, that's not always true. An interesting example actually was one that I had a conversation recently at an event. They work for a small not-for-profit, and a lot of their work was actually handled by volunteers who were really techie, kind of really interested in the space. However, when speaking with this person working at the not-for-profit, they said they only ever buy solutions versus building anything once it's past like a couple of lines of Apex. This was just because they had such a high turnover of volunteers, and they were often working in the technical teams, but they'd sometimes be working in the team and then they'd leave. And a lot of the time, as a result of them being in and out, or possibly even having a full-time job on the side, they just weren't fully considering the needs of this organization. And as a result, there was insufficient documentation that would then support that. So when they did leave, who's able to pick it up? So that was why they ended up favoring the buy kind of route. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Callum. And what about you, Joe? Do you think it's as black and white as build versus buy as your fire emojis in the chat might think today?
Yeah, I don't think it's a black and white decision. I don't think one of them is going to always be better than the other, certainly. And there's even a lot of projects that I've worked on where using a combination of custom building and pre-built solutions from the App Exchange is the best way to go. The recent one that comes to mind as an example is a project we did internally for Bitwise's real estate development team, which was a really large custom build. We did go with a custom object model. And I do think starting from that custom place was a really good call. It's a pretty unique team, and we wanted their data and their workflows to fit into other things at Bitwise in a pretty different way. But same project, a really key piece of it, we did end up buying a product for, which was a Proven Works product called Simple Import from your team, Ruth and Callum. And that I also would say, in hindsight, it still was the right call there. It was an easily scalable piece of functionality that was already built out and documented by Proven Works, and it saved us a ton of admin and dev hours that it might have taken to build, as well as maybe even more importantly, hours of documentation, training, maintenance over time as we scaled that solution.
Really good point. And yeah, scalability, definitely a key factor determining kind of any way that you kind of view that question. Scalability and what happens in the future is absolutely like needs to be part of the core of that conversation, I think. So we've started off, we've talked about who is building, who is buying. We've moved on to kind of point 2, talking about some real examples there. Let's move to discussion point 3. We're going to be talking about financial cost, because I think it's safe to say that for the majority of us, financial cost is probably one of our biggest factors when making a decision for our business. So from both sides, what are the financial costs that we need to be aware of? Are there any unforeseen costs on either side of build versus buy? What makes one more cost efficient than the other? Where could the financial pitfalls be hiding? I'm aware I've just asked a lot of questions in one go, but maybe Joe, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, and I think I'll get into something that both Callum and I have already brought up here, which is the sort of scalability and maintenance side. But yeah, in my experience, build definitely can be more cost effective than buy, whether or not you're working with an in-house admin team or a consultancy. but only if that team knows what they're doing. They have a plan in place, both for the build itself and for supporting users and admins over time, to make sure that configuration continues to work and people continue to know how to use it. So it can also be a better idea to do the build thing if you have super unique business processes, like I mentioned with our real estate development team, where an existing solution might kind of be impractical, or you might have to tweak and customize a lot anyways to get it to work for your team. But yeah, all that said, the major pitfalls that you can run into building your own solution are going to be those unexpected bugs that pop up over time, companies' needs changing, personnel changing and needing new training, whether that's your admins or your end users. So it can be extremely, extremely time intensive to maintain something you've already built, therefore making it costly. So buying a product, sometimes you could run into the same thing. Sometimes, and often I'd say products on the App Exchange out there already have a lot of maintenance and support that are offered. So I'd recommend, if you're buying, to look into support packages offered with the product.
Thanks so much. Goldmine of an answer there. Callum, Joe's just said that building is often more cost efficient than buying. What do you have to say about that?
Ooh, well, it's a difficult one because I think there's a lot of things to consider. There is obviously a price tag on most options, and quite often when you then pitch that to your seniors, it's like, this is how much it's going to cost. Off we go. Underneath that, though, you really need to break it down. We've spoken about sort of the hidden costs, perhaps, and I'll sort of expand upon that in a moment. But I think what is the most interesting thing is you can have two different companies that are provided the exact same options of a build option and a buy option, and the resulting costs can actually be very different for both of them. For example, if we look at perhaps complexity of implementing, which is kind of a factor to consider when trying to solve a solution, we could have one company where they have a technical team internally, and as I said earlier, like ready to get hands-on, and they might be able to whiz through the requirement in minutes, maybe not minutes, that's maybe optimistic, but a couple of days they can get through a task. Whereas then, some of these other businesses where they're a bit smaller, perhaps mostly led by admins, they might look at this requirement sheet and think, oh my gosh, this is way too complex for me. It's just not going to be something I can achieve. So for them, it may be more about considering, what am I getting when I buy a solution? And kind of speaking to that, the implementation is the main thing, getting it up and running. How quickly can you get it in? Because you're going to start seeing a return on that investment perhaps quicker for those. But then, that is both-sided. When we talk about ongoing maintenance, that's one thing that we've kind of spoken about, and Joe, I appreciate you bringing that up a little bit. When you opt for a pre-built solution, quite often there is support provided, at least some free support if there's technical issues. And then you can sometimes opt in for things like customer success, where they're able actually to help you implement and kind of take on board quicker the solution. And what I think is important when we look at like the App Exchange, where there's plenty of apps available, is that a lot of them will have a dedicated support team behind that tool. And what that means is, as a result, you're almost hiring a guru specifically of that solution. So it's not necessarily just the tool you're getting. You're not just solving the business problem. You're also sort of hiring someone or having a consultant at hand that's able to perhaps answer those questions that otherwise you might have to document internally. And as a result, that can save a lot of money. And I just kind of want to put on one kind of prime example of that is, in recent times, Salesforce have retired a bunch of APIs. And this has been a bit of a headache for many organizations that have been on the platform for a very long time. In fact, a lot of the people that may have written sort of Apex all those years ago probably have left the company, or maybe it was originally written in the first days of them deploying. And as a result of that, new teams are having to go through and kind of fix the API versions. Not necessarily always that difficult, but if you are buying a solution, then immediately that's just handled and dealt with. And as a customer, all you need to do is update the package. And if you have any questions, you've got a team there ready to help.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Really relevant example even over the past month or so of those API retirements there. I think one thing that's come up in this conversation and in our prep for this is that cost isn't just about like the price tag up front of either solution. Time is a very costly resource. Dev time is, speed of implementation, time spent dealing with niggles, time spent onboarding. All of this is part of a financial cost that definitely needs to be considered. So moving on to kind of our next discussion point around project considerations. Callum, we'll start with you. Let's say congratulations, the poll's being swayed. Everyone wants to be buying a solution off of the App Exchange. Congratulations.
Oh, fantastic. I love
obviously, that's only the start of kind of the project. So what is it that they need to consider now that they've committed to buying something off the shelf?
Yeah, so just I was looking at one of the Q&As that just came in, and this kind of expands from Ray, I believe, talking about recommendations for scoping out apps from the App Exchange, perhaps. So I do have kind of a list of tips that I've used in the past because as an ISV, we do use Salesforce ourselves, so I have definitely been on the purchasing side of this situation. So when I'm looking for an application, and what I've advised to others is firstly, check for reviews. So once you've found an application, has it got reviews? There's got a star system. It's fantastic. If it's 5 stars, have a look at the comments. The reviews really can give you insight into a product that, the application provider just can't provide. If it's got low reviews, maybe just check it out. And what I would also advise to anyone on listening in today is if you have actually purchased an App Exchange solution, or if you do use an App Exchange solution and you really like it, or perhaps you got a bit of feedback, write a review on the App Exchange, because you spending 2 minutes writing an honest review can really help someone else make that decision further down the line. If you're happy with the reviews, check out the releases. You should be able to see when it was initially released, and you should also be able to see when the last release was. That's something on the App Exchange. So what you're looking for there really is, are the developers keeping the package up to date? And also, are they keeping it updated with any new features? Salesforce is obviously ever expanding, and maybe you want to make sure that the developers sort of have that same mindset as well. Once you're happy there, check the documentation. We kind of spoke that different people will be implementing with different skill sets. So look at the documentation. Is it sufficient? And is the team who will be implementing it going to be able to follow along? Next, another one we kind of mentioned a couple of times is support. A little tip that I'd advise is, if they've got a support email address, email it. Before you've even bought the product, just send it an email and see how quickly they'll reply. You could even put a sales query into it, but ultimately that's going to hit their support mailbox. For anyone using Salesforce, you might have a case raised. How quickly can they actually respond to you getting in contact? And that will give you a flavour of what you're going to be working with on an ongoing basis. And then if you're happy with all of that, a trial. We've got sandboxes. The App Exchange generally promotes app providers to allow for trials. So install it in a sandbox and see how quickly you can flesh out a quick proof of concept. You don't have to do the full implementation, but just try and get something going, run a couple of tests and see if you're happy with it.
Nice. Really like that top tip of emailing the company. I think it's such a clear litmus test straight away of how quick do they respond, and I think definitely sets the precedent for what that relationship could look like. Really great. Joe, obviously more fire emojis in the chat if you're team Joe. What do we have to be considering for all those people who are team build?
Yeah, so if you've already opted to build, assuming you've done sort of a basic cost analysis at the beginning, you've checked out apps, maybe there aren't any that fit your needs. At the risk of sounding like a broken record here, I think the big ones to keep in mind are maintenance, scalability, and documentation. And these are all super tied together. But maintenance, it's really easy to focus on just like the time investment that it's going to take to stand up and deploy your solution in the first place, and forget about the time and effort that's going to happen afterwards in order to maintain it. And like I sort of alluded to earlier, that could just be small fixes to your initial build, improvement requests and changes from your users, internal workflow changes in general, and Salesforce updates like the APIs being retired that Callum mentioned. So yeah, if you've built the solution, you just need to make sure that you're also owning keeping it working. Scalability too is if your company or your stakeholders teams are growing and adopting new operating procedures, you need to avoid building something too custom that locks your users into a box and they won't be able to build as their company grows. And then lastly, documentation and training materials. As Callum also mentioned, that's a big piece of buying a solution. Check out those documentations. If you're building your own, you need to write that documentation. And that's really, really important to have docs that you can use on the admin and support team. Or if you're the one admin that you can pass on to your replacement, something like that. And also training materials for end users to be able to continue using the solution.
Yeah, of course. That like long-term planning, absolutely. So you have maintenance, scalability, documentation, and training materials. Really great points. Thank you so much, both. Some really great stuff in the chat as well. We love good documentation too, Ray. We love it. Why don't we move on to our next discussion point so that we can have time for questions? So let's say Callum and Joe, you both have 20, 30 seconds, I'll be generous, left to represent build or represent buy. What is it that you want to leave people with? What is it you want to be saying? Joe, do you want to hit us up first?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that build can definitely be more cost efficient in the right circumstances. Have to add the disclaimer. It can be more appropriate if you have really unique workflows, and it can be a really, really good learning experience if you're trying to skill up an admin or a team. It's also really important to have that thorough discovery before you begin to decide on a solution, and that a well-informed decision starts with that discovery and looking at the app exchange if anything already exists that meets your needs, and then beginning to develop a solution, whether that's in-house or you're bringing in consultants. And then again, always factor in the time that you're going to have to sink into the maintenance, scalability, and documentation side.
Nice. Always coming back to maintenance, scalability, documentation. I love it. Callum, what about you? A generous 20 to 30 seconds. What do people need to know?
Or, I mean, if buy is an option, seriously consider it. Make a well-informed decision to determine if it is best for you. There are circumstances where it's just not, but put time in and it will pay dividends later. Personally speaking, I really think there is a hidden value in having a support team dedicated to solving issues. The amount of times when it's been late at night and I see an error email come through and I'm like, gosh, I really just need to get that solved. And I can just email someone else who actually looks after that product. And, they have such wide visibility, hopefully, of lots of different types of size of organizations. Me, myself, I used to run the support mailbox here at Proven Works and I still oversee it. And as a result of that, I've seen so many different variants of the same issue that I can sort of immediately give feedback and resolve it. If something looks strange, I'm here to help. And hopefully that's what you see when you buy a solution. And I think the underlying thing is when you do scope out, when you're going to choose whether to build or buy, don't just think, what's it going to be in 1 month, 1 year, think 5 years, 10 years, hopefully your business is going to carry on growing. So ensuring that choice that you make then is going to be still the same reason and support when you are further down the line from your journey.
Awesome. So when you're buying, you're not just buying the solution, you're buying a genius as well. Maybe if you buy from Proven Works, Callum is your genius. Who knows? That is great. Thank you so much. Some really valuable content there. And I know everyone in the comments is appreciating that too. I'm just checking the time and we've got time for a couple of questions. So let's be taking a look at them. Up at the top for Callum, seems like you're sitting on the fence a bit, potentially not maybe advocating as much for buying as you could be. Why are you on the fence?
Well, I mean, if you look in chat, there's a lot of fire emojis for Joe, so I already feel like I'm losing, and I kind of have to sit on the fence here. Just otherwise, I'm going to get kicked out or something. No, honestly speaking, I mean, I have been doing product stuff for about 8 years in Salesforce, and I have seen organizations of all shapes and sizes, worked with people from completely different backgrounds and different skill sets. And I really think both sides appeal. And I think, you really have to flesh out those options. What I can do, I can try and find a list, or there's some really good LinkedIn content of just what to consider, as I know we've kind of talked anecdotally about these items, but from experience, I do always prefer buying myself. But as Joe said, when you have those really sort of custom items that can only really be solved by building out further, just carry on building out. It's fine. It's not a problem. Just scope it out and document it, because your colleagues in 5 or 10 years' time will really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Callum. And Joe, I'd be interested to hear your views. I think the next two questions are kind of on a similar topic, and as someone with a developer mindset and who is inclined to build, but who is someone who has gone and bought at the same time, I would be very interested to hear your answers to these questions around, what's your recommendation for scoping out apps, like when you did it yourself. What do you need to consider? What could the interferences be? As someone who's done it kind of, and yeah, we've been the ones to provide you with that buy.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it starts with exactly what Callum had outlined earlier, with checking it out on the App Exchange, reading those reviews, and making sure that others are out there using it and enjoying it, and making sure that it's documented and well supported and will move on in the future. Specifically, Ray, for your question about interfering with other apps' existing packages, definitely recommend sandboxes. Always first install it in a sandbox. If there's any other particular functionality that you're worried it might clash with, just give it a good trial run with some test data in there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really interesting to hear from your perspective. Shout out to Rachel, who's calling up Bitwise, offers extensive advanced solution engineers investigating what is right. Yeah, find the experts and speak to them. Absolutely get them part of your conversation. That is all we've got time for. So first off, I want to thank our wonderful panelists for sharing hopefully some real insights into the build versus buy question with us today. I've certainly found it really helpful. I hope you have too. And most importantly of all, thank you to all of you at home for spending your time with us today, giving up your time to join us. We so appreciate you being here. Callum, Hurry, Joe Wheelock, I believe we can both find you on LinkedIn if people want to carry on the conversation. And we do hope you have a great rest of the day.
100%. Lovely. Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much, Ruth.